Let's start by looking at the introduction. The Malay rulers have been immune from civil and criminal charges since the 1957 establishment of the Malaysian Constitution. The Malaysian Constitution was revised in 1993 March to abolish this immunity, resulting in several amendments to the Federal Constitution, including amendments of Articles 32, 38, 42, 63, 72, and 1. The rulers are treated as hereditary monarchs and exercise significant powers as a result of Malays' customary respect for their rulers. The Malay rulers have historically occupied the top positions of social and judicial, executive and legislative influence. Malay people's loyalty and fears of rulers sustains his dominance. Public support for the reforms point to a shift in conventional Malay cultural ideals. This explains why Malay royals have lost their influence in Malay cultures and Malaysian politics. As a result, it is critical to map the circumstances that led to the constitutional amendments of 1993, as well as the other causes that play a role in this case.
Before we indulge in analyzing the events that transpired in the constitutional crisis of 1993 and the repercussions that followed, we first need to analyze the historical origins and structure of the Malay rulers. The Malay rulers have existed since the advent of the Malacca Sultanate in the 14th and 15th century. In this monarchy, the concept of loyalty and absolute sovereignty, or known in Malay as Daulat, were observed. The rulers have also been the head of religion since the arrival of Islam in the Malay archipelago. The Malacca Sultanate, however, came to an end when imperial powers arrived, beginning with the Portuguese in 1511, followed by the Dutch in 1641, and later on the arrival of the British in Penang in 1786, as well as Singapore in 1819. The British, being directly involved in administrative matters, significantly curtailed the powers of the rulers, upon which the rulers only had a say in religious and cultural matters. Such hindrances also seem to have been in place post-World War II, during the introduction of Malayan Union, in which the Malay rulers were coerced into agreeing with. Unfortunately, this completely removed the administrative powers of the rulers, limiting their powers to religious and cultural matters. The Merdeka Constitution of 1957, however, in efforts to cater to the dignities of the rulers, safeguarded the position and prestige of the rulers. A constitutional head of state was also elected among their highnesses the rulers, known as the Yang di-Pertuan Besar. The rulers also remained the heads of Islam in their respective states. The existing position of the rulers was provided for by the constitution along with the immunity of the rulers from court proceedings and was further safeguarded by constitutional provisions. The power to grant pardons for offences committed within their state in particular were also vested in the rulers. The racial riots of the 13th of May 1969 brought about more constitutional amendments to provide for the betterment of the Malays. These amendments also prohibited the questioning of status, authority, and entitlements of Malay rulers. The Conference of Rulers consented to these amendments to protect Malays as they symbolize the unity of Malays. The time frame between 1957 and 1983 included feelings of acrimony between the legislative and rulers. In 1983, the government was worried about a subsequent Yang di-Pertuan Agong, who at that point of time would be the Sultan of Johor, who might intervene in federal politics. With that in mind, the government initiated a constitutional amendment bill for the purpose of removing royal assent to legislation passed by parliament, as well as to grant the Prime Minister the sole power to proclaim an emergency. Prior to that, the power to proclaim an emergency was vested in the Yang di-Pertuan Agong on advice of the government. The introduction of this constitutional amendment bill triggered the very problem that it was devised to avert. A 5-month constitutional crisis followed after the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, with the consent of other rulers, agreed upon the decision not to assent to this bill. The government was forced to compromise with the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, where His Royal Highness would be granted the authority to refer bills back to Parliament. The provision with regard to emergency powers was also revoked by the government. The rulers then affirmed that they would not refuse to assent to the bills at the state level, something that the amendment bill strove to regulate in the first place. The crisis of 93, which brought about constitutional amendments, had seen a few events which preceded it. Prior to these amendments, events of rulers and members of the royal families abusing their privileges and rights were seen. These events were made possible by the Federal Constitution, which provided royal immunity from civil and criminal liability prior to 1993. The Douglas Gomez incident involved the royal family members of Johor. The field hockey team of Maktab Sultan Abu Bakar, coached by Douglas Gomez, had advanced to the semi-finals of a tournament organized by the Malaysian Hockey Federation. On an order from the Johor Education Department chief, Douglas Gomez was ordered to withdraw the team from the match. Several Johor hockey teams also pulled from the tournaments. Following that, Douglas Gomez requested that all Johor Hockey Association principal office bearers to resign and criticized them for destroying hockey in the country. Gomez was then summoned to Istana Bukit Serene in Johor Bahru on the 30th of November for reasons that seem to have nothing to do with any of the Malay rulers. According to Gomez, the Sultan of Johor came after several hours, accompanied by 6 men in jeans and t-shirt and 10 to 12 officers of the Johor military force. Gomez was reprimanded and beaten up by the Sultan. Douglas Gomez filed a police report alleging that he had been the victim of an attack when at the palace, and that despite there being many people present at the scene, the only one responsible for his injuries were the Sultan himself. Other examples for the abuse of privilege by Malay rulers are the allegations for forestry issues. Pahang royalty were alleged to have pressured the Pahang government and its forestry officials for additional concessions of timber, despite considerable concessions already being made. The Pahang Palace was then involved in determining where forest concessions should be situated and prompted construction on access roads without permission, replacing uncooperative forestry officers. Some rulers are also accused of refusing to pay debts and fulfill contractual obligations using the immunity from civil penalty as a justification. By obtaining import approval licenses for cars of friends and other members of the royal family, the royal's privilege of being able to import luxury cars duty-free was allegedly violated. The car of a timber tycoon was seized on account of attempting to avoid paying import duty by using a Sultan of Pahang approved license.
Now, let's move on to the amendments made to the Constitution. The constitutional amendments are aimed at removing the immunity of the royal families. The proposal of the amendments of the Constitution obtained the huge support from coalition government parties, non-government union parties, and also organizations in Malaysian society. These amendment proposals concern the ruler's immunity, changes to the ruler's pardoning powers, and changes to the ruler's sedition powers in the context of parliamentary proceedings involving the rulers. A new Constitution Amendment Act was established in Parliament on 8 March 1993 and approved on the next day, which rendered 4 major compromises to their majesties as stated in this slide. On 22nd March 1993, the Yang di-Pertuan Agong was presented with the re-enacted amendment bill, which he approved, and the constitution was then amended. Other amendments include the Yang di-Pertuan Agong shall assent to a bill within 30 days after it is submitted to him, and if not assented, the bill shall become law according to Article 66, Clause 4 and Clause 4A of the Federal Constitution. A similar change was also proposed to the Constitution's 8th schedule to incorporate a new section, 1A, where the ruler is required to behave on advice in the exercise of his duties under the Constitution of the state or any legislation, or as a member of the Conference of Rulers, the ruler shall consider and follow on such advice. Besides that, the bill also sought to limit the Yang di-Pertuan Agong's and rulers' discretion in issues which fall within the federal and state constitutions under Article 40, Clause 1A. In short, the Constitutional Amendment Act of 1993 placed the rulers under the law by eliminating their immunity from prosecution for criminal and civil proceedings. Next, you all must be wondering, what are the repercussions of these events? Firstly, it affects the judicial system and court structure, whereby a new court named a special court was established to try out cases involving the rulers. This court consists of the Chief Justice of the Federal Court, which is currently Tengku Maimun Tuan Mat, Chief Judges of the High Courts, and 2 other people who are or have experience of holding office as Judge of the Federal Court or High Court. These judges must be chosen by the Conference of Rulers. Under Article 182, Clause 3, the Special Court have exclusive jurisdiction to try out all offences and civil cases committed in the Federation by the Yang di-Pertuan Agong or the ruler of a state, while Article 182 Clause 4 provides that the Special Court have the same jurisdiction and powers as are vested in the inferior courts, the High Court, and the Federal Court. According to Article 183, consent of the Attorney General is required before bringing any action against the YDPA or the ruler of a state in the Special Court. Effect to the rulers. With the permission of the Attorney General, a case can be brought against the YDPA and other rulers. The YDPA and other rulers can also be prosecuted by the state. If a ruler is penalized to captivity for longer than 24 hours, he will stop being the ruler of the state unless he received a free pardon, which can be obtained if the Conference of Rulers decide to forgive him for his offence. Another effect is that a ruler will be jailed similar to any average individual if convicted. Finally, effect to the citizens. Malaysian citizens don't have to be afraid and have the rights to sue Malaysian rulers. However, till date, only one case has been brought against the rulers, which is the case of Farida Begum binti Abdullah and Sultan Haji Ahmad Shah. Unfortunately, this case was dismissed as Farida Begum was not a Malaysian and hence had no right to challenge the Sultan. Another effect could be seen in the change in attitude of some of the Malays towards the rulers. They felt less reliant on the benefits awarded to the Malays under the quota system and citizenship rules, the preservation of which was vested in the rulers by the constitution.
Well, that brings us to the final section of the video. Now I would like to do the conclusion. In Malaysia, the abolition of the ruler's immunity was a major constitutional change. The executive's decision to limit the ruler's power and perceived excesses was met with evident popular support. Based on the constitutional limitations on their authority, the Malay rulers had a substantial impact in Malay society and politics. 1993 constitutional amendments led in several adjustments to the ruler's authority to prevent the rulers from abusing their influence. That's all from us. We'd like to thank you for taking time out to listen to our presentation.